What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Week 14 Cash Pool Breakdown. On today's video, I will be looking at every cash viable player on the upcoming DraftKings main slate. We've got a pretty big slate. It's going to be 13 games. Interestingly, we have 0 out of 13 games with a total above 50. So, I'm expecting to see a lot of crappy football this weekend, but, sometimes that can be the best football. It's also a slate that I think has very little value, at least, at this point, Thursday morning at recording. We've got some perspective value depending on how the rest of the Thursday and Friday practices shake out, depending on who is available on Sunday. So hopefully something opens up because, at least at this point of the week, things are looking pretty rough in my opinion. But, let's not waste any time. If you do enjoy these videos, do your boy a favor, follow me on Twitter at Ben Hover, subscribe on YouTube, check out my podcast, the DFS Dose, all that good stuff, and join me as we collectively sail to the money. But starting off here with quarterback, I've got Lamar Jackson listed here. He's 7,400 this week. He's got 7 straight games with 26 or more DraftKings points, and look, he's been incredibly consistent. He's been transcendent. He's been, unlike anything we've ever seen. He's, broken fantasy scoring, et cetera, et cetera. What else can we really say about Jackson at this point? He's incredibly elite. He's incredibly consistent. But, that being said, I expect him, again, to score around 26 points. Now, the Bills match up really well with the Ravens. Tre'Davious White will shadow Hollywood Brown, their number one option, and they're also the top team in the league when it comes to stopping tight ends. And Mark Andrews has been Jackson's number one target over his last 5 games. So, I think that this is going to be a really competitive game. I think Mark Ingram has a pretty good shot to be productive in this spot. And Lamar Jackson will probably get there. He always gets there. He's yet to encounter a team that has been able to stop him, but I think that the Bills are going to put up a really good game in this spot. I think they have a shot to win legitimately, but, both teams are going to be really competitive in this spot. Just in terms of cash builds, I think it's going to be really tough to get all the way up to Lamar Jackson, but if you have that salary, I would never blame you for playing Lamar, same way as I wouldn't blame you for playing McCaffrey or Thomas in a given week. Those 3 players are sort of an elite 3 that I don't even consider matchup with. So, that's sort of my point about Lamar, but I think a lot of people are going to be looking in this lower range here with some of these other plays. Josh Allen, it's a tough matchup. I think the Baltimore Ravens have, barely allowed any top 10 quarterbacks, maybe one all year. And look, Allen is playing, and the Bills, I guess, are playing hurry-up offense at the second highest rate in the league right now, especially over the last couple of weeks. They've just been playing no huddle a ton. Josh Allen has had one of the most consistent fantasy floors of any quarterback all season, and finally, towards the end of the year, we're starting to see some of those ceiling games that we saw last year as well. So, again, it's going to be a really tough environment for both teams in this spot, but Allen's at home. He's 6,200. He's got a ton of rushing equity. He's got, a big arm. He's going to go downfield regardless of who's matched up against John Brown. So, I would not fault you for playing Josh Allen. He's put up, 20 points or more in several tough matchups. Denver put up 20 points. Dallas put up 23.5 points on Thanksgiving, and now he's got 10 days rest coming home to prepare for a game that they're going to need to keep pace with Lamar in. So, Josh Allen, 6,200. I think he's in play. I think nobody's going to play him. They see that red third next to his name on DraftKings, and they might get scared away. But, I think Allen is squarely in play. Maybe some of these other options look a little better in cash because of matchup, but, again, super consistent. And like Lamar Jackson, I think that to a degree he's matchup proof just because of the way that he is used. The other 2 guys I've got on this list I think are pretty interesting. Ryan Fitzpatrick at 6K, playing Fitzpatrick in cash. Fitzmagic, what could go wrong? And it's tough, I think, to click his name because, we know that he could bust at any time. But the Jets have the number 2 rush DVOA in the league, and they really can't seem to stop the pass to save their lives. And the lone elite/good player in the Jets secondary is Jamal Adams, and he's in legit danger of missing this game. That can only boost Fitzpatrick. If you want to go there in tournaments, he's got a really clear, couple of players you can stack him with, Devontae Parker being one of them. So looking at Fitzmagic, I think that he's squarely in play at 6K. He's in a price range that I think is pretty affordable, and it's a great matchup. He's just going to sling the ball. Regardless, I doubt that they will have any success on the ground, as we will talk to when you get to running backs and the famous Patrick Laird. But, the last quarterback that I'm considering this week is Ryan Tannehill at 5.8K. He's on the road at Oakland. I think it's a pretty interesting spot. He's only had one game under 19 points in his 6 starts. Now, volume can definitely be a concern with him. He's gone 3 straight games with under 25 pass attempts. He does have a little bit of rushing equity, but, not in the same ballpark as, Lamar or Josh Allen or any of those guys. But, it's a decent boost to his floor, I think. But, I think my main concern with Tannehill is that when the Dolphins, when the Titans get down to the red zone, they're just so likely to feed Henry. They get inside the 5. What are the chances that Tannehill is going to throw a passing touchdown? It seems very, very minuscule because they're just going to let Henry pound it in. I mean, Henry's got multiple touchdown games in 3 out of his last 4, and I'll talk about that in a moment as well when we get to running back. But it just seems like, touchdown upside is there with Tannehill. He's been super consistent and had a high floor. So, I like it, and Oakland's allowed the 3rd most fantasy points to quarterbacks this season. So I would definitely consider Tannehill and Fitzpatrick as 2 of the primary options for cash games in that range, 5.8K to 6K. Moving on to running back here. Starting off with McCaffrey, I've got to be honest, I've got some concerns with him, and it's maybe just speculation, maybe not, but look, he's got a $200 discount off of that 10.5K price tag that he's been locked into for a month straight. 10.3, it's not cheap, but the price is always worth it for the role that we lock into our lineups with Christian McCaffrey. He's had more than 10 catches in each of his last 3 games versus the Falcons, but organizationally, I think we really need to pay attention to what's going on in Carolina. The Panthers opted to fire their head coach with 4 games left to play. If that's not a clear indication of where their priorities are right now, I don't know what is with the team clearly looking ahead to 2020 and beyond, is giving McCaffrey another 100 touches over the next month, the optimal strategy. I can't say that it is, and it seems like, firing the coach and then, it's just going to be putting more pressure on the body of your team's most valuable asset. So, I doubt that the NFL team itself is going to look at it this way. They've got a new coordinator. Norv Turner's son, I think, is going to be taking over the offense in a bigger way. So, I don't know. It's difficult, I think, to put 10.3K when we don't know what the situation is going to be. Are they going to scale his workload back? I wouldn't think so, but I think that it's at least a concern. And, you don't want a concern in a 10.3K play in a cash game. I think that that's true. So I'm not sure. And again, it's going to be a second division matchup, and we know that those tend to be more low scoring than they perhaps project to be. It's just the way that goes. So yeah, McCaffrey's definitely in play. I wouldn't fault you for playing him. Ton of reasons to like him, but I think that there's some other options that you can look for in cash. One of them being Derrick Henry, who has been shockingly priced all the way up to 8,200, but maybe it shouldn't be shocking at all. He's averaging just over 30 DK points per game over his last 4. He's got multiple touchdowns in 3 out of the last 4, and over 100 yards in 3 out of the last 4. Lots been made about his splits versus November and December versus the rest of his career, and I don't know how much credence you give to that. I don't really give it that much, to be honest, but even so, he's just so dominant. They lean on him. And he's got a ton of touchdown equity within this team. I talked about it as a concern for Ryan Tannehill. When it comes to Derrick Henry, he's going to get scoring opportunities. People just can't stop this dude. He's too big. He's too athletic. So, Henry, I like Henry quite a bit in this spot at 8,200. He did miss practice on Wednesday, and I have not seen the Thursday report yet. So, something to keep an eye on. But I imagine that he will be just fine. I think one of the top plays in cash games this week is going to be Leonard Fournette. Absolutely. He's only 7.8K. It seems like he has not been priced up despite the workload that he's had. I mean, 11 and 12 targets in each of his last 2 games. It's just insane the amount of, pass game usage he's had. And, if he's not getting pass game usage, he's getting touches. Like, he doesn't really score that many touchdowns, but he theoretically still has a lot of touchdown equity within his own team. He should be used heavily, in the red zone and at the goal line. So I'm not really scared of that. And interestingly, I read this note earlier that he's drawn a vast majority, about 3/4 of his targets against zone coverage, which the Chargers play at the highest rate in the league. So I think we're in for another big, target game for Leonard Fournette, and whether or not he's efficient with his touches doesn't really matter when you're basically your team's entire offense. So I do like Leonard Fournette as probably the top cash running back on the week. Now, another running back that I think is incredibly interesting, due mostly to their pass game role, is Alvin Kamara, who's been priced down all the way to 7K. Now, yeah, it's definitely going to be a tough matchup, but the 49ers run defense, especially on outside runs, which, Kamara's super explosive at himself, I think is very, not as tough as some people may believe. Everybody knows that Kamara is going through a major touchdown drought. We've been saying touchdown regression for weeks and weeks now. When that happens is, your guess is as good as mine. But look, he's gotten 8 or more targets in each of his last 4 games, played a season high 82% of snaps on Thanksgiving. He's well rested, 10 days of rest. And, in a real NFL sense, this game means a ton because these teams are both 10-2. They're both, one of the top 3 teams in the NFC. And this head-to-head victory is going to mean a lot in terms of seeding. The Saints have already clinched a playoff spot. They've clinched their division, but, they want that number 1 seed. And I think this victory would go a long way. They're going to be giving it their all, absolutely. And, Breeze even mentioned it to the media that, one of the ways that he's going to be mitigating the, injuries on the left side of the offensive line that the Saints are currently dealing with is going to be getting the ball out quickly to guys like Kamara and Thomas. So, I expect Kamara to have a massive pass game role in this spot. And at 7K, I think that you have to think about just locking that in there right along with Leonard Fournette. Now, this is where things get a little bit shakier in terms of cash game running backs. James White at 5,500. Look, he had a monster end to his Sunday Night Football game, nearly put up 40 DK points, by far the best game he's had on the season. And, interestingly, he out-touched Sony Michel as well, had 14 carries, 8 catches as well for 2 touchdowns through the air. And look, he's basically one of only 2 players on the Patriots offense with any type of bankable usage and, bankable productivity. So I think that a good way to look at him is like Patrick Laird, but with a ceiling. No offense to Patrick Laird, but at least we've seen it, and it's a good game environment. The Patriots are going to have to keep up with Mahomes in this spot. And yeah, I think that James White is squarely in play despite, obviously we can't really expect him to put up another 30-plus point game. He's only done it just once, and that was last week, 6 days ago from Sunday. So we'll have to see whether or not James White is a good play. I think he's in the same range here as Devontae Freeman, who I think, squarely in play despite being arguably total dust. He should have, again, a bankable workload, and he's in the nut matchup. Panthers just bleed touchdowns to running backs, and, Freeman got good use in his first game back after a multi-game absence, had 21 touches, played 66% of snaps, and, saw pass game usage, 4 catches on 5 targets. So, he gets 15 plus touches, 4 or 5 catches and a touchdown in this spot, which I think is pretty likely. He's going to pay off value and then some at 5.4K. So I think that you can consider both of these guys. Singletary I think is a decent play for 5.7, but I don't think that he's better than either of them, so I didn't include him on the list. And, look, I think the cheapest that you can look at running backs in cash this week is Patrick Laird. First off, I just want to shout out Peter Overzet and Davis Maddock. They had Patrick Laird on Davis's podcast. It was a really cool moment, super dope for DFS. They did an awesome job with it. If you haven't heard it, I'm sure anybody who's seeing this has definitely seen or heard it, but, it's called the Take Cast. If you haven't, they talked to Patrick Laird this week. It was super dope. Yeah, just shout out to them. They did a great job with it. And deeper than that, I'm Android Brothers here with Peter. And when Patrick Laird was just roasting him at the end of the podcast, I felt that in my soul. That was awesome. But in terms of DraftKings Week 14 NFL fantasy football, the Jets are the second toughest matchup in the league if you look at DVOA against the rush. Patrick Laird had 10 rushing attempts for 5 yards, including 1 on carry for 4. So, I'm not a mathematician, but if those other 9 carries equated to 1 yard, it's not exactly what you would call efficient. The Jets do give up a lot of receptions to running back, which fits well with Laird's, skill set. But look, he only played 59% of snaps last week, and I don't really see that going up. I think Zach Zenner and Myles Gaskins will almost certainly absorb the totality of Kalen Ballage's role, and it would be incredibly difficult for them to be less efficient with it than Ballage was. So, look, if Laird has a similar workload to what he got last week and doesn't get the touchdown, you're not really in a great spot. If you want to lock down 8 to 12 fantasy points on DK, by all means, plug and play, but I don't think that I am going to be on the Laird train this week, despite being a huge fan of, the interactions he's had with the DFS community this week. Moving on to wide receiver here, I just want to talk about Michael Thomas for a second at 8.3K. I think he's a fine play, and I think people are going to shy away from him because of the matchup. I've talked about it a little bit, I've alluded to it, but I think that there are 3 players right now in the NFL that are unlike any other players. It's Lamar Jackson at quarterback, Christian McCaffrey at running back, and Michael Thomas at wide receiver. They're having transcendent seasons. Look, Lamar got priced down last week facing the same 49ers team, and I think that it makes him an awesome value. 8.3K is too cheap for Michael Thomas. It is what it is. And look, he busted on Thanksgiving, but he's coming home after a 10-day break, and I'm all about it. Breeze made comments, like I said, to the media. They're going to have to force the ball out quickly to Thomas and to Kamara to mitigate the damage that has been done to the left side of their line via injury, and the 49ers are going to get good pressure. He's going to have to get the ball out quickly. So I think that Michael Thomas is going to eat, and the 49ers have stopped wide receiver production, and they're the best at the league in limiting downfield passes, but that's not really MT's game. And I don't think there's a corner or secondary player in the NFL that can just cover Michael Thomas. So, I expect him to get free a ton in this game. I expect him to be in his usual, 10 catch range, and, 8,300, I think you can play him for sure. Now, the biggest argument against him is that Devontae Adams is only 300 cheaper. And Adams has 5 straight games with 10 plus targets. Rodgers averages over 2 yards per attempt more at home than he does on the road. Not to say that he's bad on the road, but he's better at home. So I think that, Adams is got a ton of touchdown equity in this offense. Him and Rodgers have a great connection, and the matchup is quite a bit better than, Thomas's matchup. And for 300 less, I think that he's a clear play at wide receiver in this spot. So, I would not fault you for playing Michael Thomas. I think that both of them are, equally as safe as the running backs with the roles that they have. High-priced wide receivers are usually more volatile, but I did not include the 2 of them in that discussion. I think that they're incredibly safe between Devontae Adams and Michael Thomas. Some other wide receivers I'm considering for cash, Julian Edelman, and I mentioned it when I talked about James White. I think that there's 2 Patriots players on offense that have any type of safe bankability in terms of production and workload. Everybody else is, hit or miss. Edelman is the one other than White, clearly. You'd have to go back to week 5 to find a game where Edelman got under 10 targets. And, the Patriots are going to have to throw. Brady's throwing a ton every single week, whether it's efficient or not. It's definitely not. But to Edelman and to White, I think that you can bank on their usage, and for 7,100, you're getting a ton of targets. So I would not be opposed to playing Edelman in cash this week. And I think, you look 7,100, 7K, and 6,900. All 3 of these guys are squarely in play. DJ Moore, Devontae Parker, they're getting a ton of targets too. Like, all of their targets are extremely comparable. DJ Moore is in an awesome matchup. The Falcons are top 10 in points allowed to wide receiver, and they have a special propensity to be giving up touchdowns. But again, same concerns with CMC. What are this team's priorities? Are they looking to, put out their best effort? Are they going to be a little bit broken after losing their coach? It's hard to tell. That stuff is really hard to incorporate into projections and incorporate into, DFS as a whole. But I do think that we need to be cognizant of it. And then, the cheapest of this tier of players, or at least in this pricing tier, is Devontae Parker, who, look, he's having a baller season. He's having a breakout. Came late, but hey, it's here now. 6,900. I never thought I'd see the day where Devontae Parker was almost 7K, but I mean, he deserves it. 4 straight weeks of 10 plus targets. He's got a super high floor. Just looking at points and for all the same reasons that Fitzpatrick is viable, Parker's viable. The secondary is bad, and it's beat up. So I would not mind targeting Devontae Parker. I just don't know if he's necessarily a better play than Moore or Edelman. So that's really going to be what you have to consider, and I'm going to be thinking quite a bit about which of these three guys is, the best play, because I haven't really landed on a decision at this point. And then some other guys I'm considering for cash a little bit lower, a little bit cheaper would be, Zach Pascal, who had an awesome showing last week, and now he enters the week 14's best matchup, the nut matchup. And look, T.Y. Hilton, not going to play this week. Chester Rogers, unlikely to play this week, or might even be on IR, actually. Eric Ebron is on IR. So they're all out of the picture, and it's going to be the Pascal show once again. He had 10 targets, 7 catches last week. Paris Campbell looks likely to return, so that could change things. Marcus Johnson played 90% of snaps last week, so, both of them I think would be viable. You'd like to see, Johnson play without Campbell, I think, because that would solidify his role. I think Campbell might just completely, overtake that number 2 spot. So I don't know which of these guys you want to play in cash. I think we just need to wait and see a little bit and see what things look like. Also, Jack Doyle, who I'll talk about at tight ends, is incredibly viable once again. So, I don't know. It's difficult, I think, to parse through this. Pascal has been priced up to the point where he's not like a necessity to play, but, I wouldn't fault you for playing him. He's certainly in a great spot with a secure workload. And then right below that is Jamison Crowder. I like Crowder. I think he's one of the values of the week. He's still had a incredibly, pertinent target share in this Jets offense. He's got a great connection with Darnold, and, the Dolphins can't cover anybody, and that includes slot receivers. So, I do expect Crowder to have a good game this week. His box score hasn't been there. It's been shifting towards Robbie Anderson. Finally late in the season, Anderson is starting to be a little bit productive, but I still think Crowder is the option to target, especially in cash games. I'm looking for a bounce back in a big way this week from Jamison Crowder at 5,300. And that's really the cheapest I think you can go. Like I said, Paris Campbell for 3.2K and Marcus Johnson 3.6K. I think they eat at each other, so you can really only consider one of them. I think, talent-wise, you'd want to look at Campbell, but he has been out of the offense for a little while. But either of them would be a good play if the other was to miss. And if they both play, I'm not sure if you can really go with either one. Although if they both play, I would prefer Campbell, I think. No doubt about it. In tight ends, sticking with the Colts, I think Jack Doyle is probably the best play on the slate for cash games. He's 4,600. Definitely got priced up quite a bit to account for the loss of Eric Ebron and the other pass catchers and for the good matchup. But look, it is a plus matchup, and he had 11 targets last week. And I think that you can project something very similar for him. We've seen this. We saw it with Eric Ebron getting a ton of targets last year when Doyle was out. And I think we're going to see it, that the opposite is true here. Brissett, Luck, it doesn't matter. It's part of this offense that they just target tight ends. So, if he gets 10 plus targets again at 4,600, he's going to be a great play in this spot. And, out of those 11 targets, he converted it to 6 for 73 and 1. And I would expect a similar line this week. So, you're paying a little bit more for it, but I think it's definitely a viable look at 4,600 this week against the Bucs. 200 cheaper, you could take a stab at Kyle Rudolph, and Rudolph has been super touchdown dependent. I think that his viability is going to come down to Adam Thielen's availability, which we're still waiting on to see at this point. I've heard that he is likely to return, but we will see how that pans out as things continue. 6 touchdowns over his last 6 games. He's incredibly consistent in the red zone. So, Rudolph, that touchdown that he had on Monday night, where it looked like Kirk was almost throwing it away, and then Rudolph just reaches up, snags it out of the sky for the touchdown. That was awesome. But, I think for only 200, the discount isn't significant enough to get off of Doyle. But, if that 200 is life and death for you, maybe Rudolph is viable after all. Didn't put Vance McDonald on this list. I'm not playing him. Just wanted to say that, despite Higbee paying off in a huge way, flow chart, et cetera, last week. Vance only has 2 games out of 11 this season with more than 3 catches. I don't expect that to change. Duck Hodges on the road, West Coast. I'm not about that this week. So just wanted to throw that out real quick. I think Ryan Griffin for 4,100. that's a more significant price difference than the 200 between Doyle and Rudolph. So I would understand that. He's in a great matchup against Miami, has a super strong role and rapport with Darnold. So, if you can't get that 500 to get up to Doyle, I think that Ryan Griffin is definitely in play as well. Would not fault you for that. And then finally, we've got Ian Thomas at the min 2,500, reminiscent of last week when Gerald Everett got hurt before pricing came out. Now, if Greg Olsen can't play, Ian Thomas will be locked in as both an awesome play and as massive chalk. Only 2,500 and has shown success in this role. He had a pretty decent amount of yardage last week when Olsen missed the last 5 games of 2018. He's shown himself to be fantasy viable in spots when Olsen was not there. Came off the bench, had 4 catches last week. So, for 2,500, I think he would definitely open up quite a bit in your lineup, and we're very value depressed on this slate. So, I definitely would be down with the Ian Thomas play. I think that, it really comes down to Jack Doyle or Ian Thomas if Olsen can't go. And he did miss Thursday practice, I'm seeing. So squarely in play, looking better and better by the day. Keep track of Olsen's injury for sure. And then, finally, defense. My stance on defense, it's always going to be what fits in your lineup for the most part. Again, I think there's a lot of good options on the slate. Packers hosting Haskins. 4K, it's really expensive, but I'd be down. The Vikings, going against David Blau. I think that they could blow him away for sure. Texans hosting Drew Lock. Come on. That screams like a high-end game to target, especially the defense at 3.3K. If that fits, I would be good with that. Saints are top 5 in both sacks and QB hits coming off 10 days rest. And, Jimmy G has definitely shown a propensity for turnovers and, turnovers coming in bunches. So I think that, we could look there at 3,100. They're definitely going to get good pressure on the 49ers in a game I'd expect them to win. And then, more realistically, because, I think that the optimal strategy in cash is for, almost always just to pay down. And, I like the Colts, 2,400. Any team facing the Bucs are in play because, Jameis loves turning the ball over, loves dropping back, taking sacks, all of that good stuff. So, you could definitely play the Colts, I think, at 2,400. And the Cardinals as well, 2,300. I said it for a second, I think Duck Hodges at home in his first home game against the Browns is a different story than going on the road. And yeah, he should see a ton of plays and a ton of dropbacks. But, 2,300 for the Cardinals facing Duck, it's in play, and it might be the best play. That's all I'm going to say about that. But, thank you for watching. If you watch this video, make sure you check out the DFS Dose podcast. Go a little bit more in depth, talk about GPP strategy as well on that show. And yeah, we'll be back on Monday to review the cash lineup that I ran on, and hopefully it'll be winning for the 5th straight week. If you enjoyed this content, follow on Twitter at BentHover, subscribe on YouTube, all that good stuff. Hit me up. We can discuss, anything you want to. DFS life, I'm always there. So yeah, hit me up and enjoy another awesome week of NFL football going into Week 14's 13-game main slate.